welcome back to Mr. What Presents. Today, a special occasion. We are celebrating print. Print paper, one of the only papers that hasn't stopped publishing since 1970, the Potrero View. Stephen Moss, thank you for joining us today and discussing community things, print things, and Potrero Hill. You're the publisher. You also write and occasionally see pictures of yours in the paper. Describe a little bit what this newspaper represents for you and how much time commitment that means for you every given week, every given month.
Sure. So, I mean, as you mentioned, the Potrero View, it's the longest running neighborhood newspaper in San Francisco. And it's really meant as a place of civic engagement. We're trying to provide information about the community that otherwise wouldn't be covered. So we do everything, and you sort of lifted up the paper nicely, everything from kind of news, which is, students struggle in San Francisco just to be able to survive economically. And then if you go further into the paper, there are obituaries of folks who wouldn't actually normally get a death notice. And there's also photos by kids that we have a photo contest. So we try to do a range of things. I'm the publisher, I'm also the editor, which means essentially I pick most of the stories that appear in the paper and I edit all the articles. So it's sort of making sure that everything in the paper actually looks and reads well and is informative and trustworthy and factual. And I spend maybe a quarter of my time on the paper. It's a labor of love.
And it comes out once a month.
Yeah.
And I do enjoy it, I gotta say, whenever I pick it up at The Good Life or when it comes to the mailbox. I enjoy just browsing through it and getting surprised as opposed to on the internet targeting a specific article and reading it. Thank you for maintaining the print publishing alive in San Francisco, especially when I was so sad we lost the Bay Guardian 2-3 years ago. How are you affected by these shifts of readership and demographics, and how do you manage to maintain your model?
Yeah, it's a tough world out there for print. I don't think that's a surprise to anybody. And we are able to survive because we have a pretty strong sense of readers. I think people, from a readership perspective, people like our paper. And they're like you. They look forward to getting it. And the experience, the physical experience of having something in your hand that's not a screen or a phone. And also the ability to kind of go through and the unexpected, right, that you weren't looking for. As you mentioned, this photo of a cute kid and his nanny and what's that about kind of thing. Or even people like to see our ads.
And it is friendly. I mean, it feels there's a sense of proximity when you read it. It is genuine.
Yeah,
you really hear the voice of your neighborhood.
Well, thank you. Again, I take that as a compliment. That's our goal here. It's hard. I mean, I would say that most of our readers are probably over the age of 40, and we're probably struggling to get people to read it that are in their 20s and 30s, because there isn't really a sense of people reading paper anymore, and people don't consume news that way. And we'll see how that affects our advertisers. In some ways, we may age out. Unless we can figure out a way to get younger readers in, we're no longer serving our advertising base if they're not reading our paper, and we will no longer get the ads that we're looking for. So I think we're going to hit in the next 10 or 15 years for our paper. Most papers already hit this. As you mentioned, the Bay Guardian is gone. The San Francisco Examiner is debilitated. I think even the Chronicle runs in the red most of the time. So it's not clear that papers in general are going to last. For us, I think we're going to hit a particularly hard period in the next 5 or 10 years.
And is advertising still your sole source of income?
Yes. I mean, we have a handful of subscribers, a growing handful of subscribers. We do have people who donate to the paper, just like they donate to KQED or you folks. But we're mostly advertiser paid for, or essentially, again, labor of love. That we pay our writers, but our writers don't get paid a whole lot of money. And again, I don't really get paid much money, and on and on and on. So it's kind of like a set of circumstances, much I would say again like what you do, that allows us to survive.
Community work, the love of getting the information out for the people, by the people.
And really an essential service. I mean, I personally believe, and the reason why I'm involved in a newspaper is that if you don't have information, I'm sure you believe this too, based on what you do, then you can't really engage in any kind of knowledgeable way in democracy.
Right.
And obviously we all believe, I think now more than ever, this kind of information about what's even happening down the street, but certainly down at City Hall and then on, is essential if we're going to be able to kind of live in a productive and engaged and good world.
And that's a perfect segue into the election we just had. So you had I want to say, really neutral coverage of District 10 supervisor contenders. Do you not have endorsements like The Guardian used to do and still does online, or do you guys like to stay neutral? Is that a choice?
Well, we used to, and as I say, we came up out of 1970s politics, and it was a very democratic paper, but a lefty democratic paper. It had a lot to do with Nancy Pelosi's election back then. It was very strongly supportive of her campaign, and it was a very much more proactively supportive of various campaigns and causes. And we continue that under my management up until recently, where we did do endorsements. We endorsed candidates, and we endorsed issues. We met with candidates, and we examined issues carefully through our editorial process. We have increasingly pulled back to try to just be informative, and that's for two reasons. One is there isn't enough neutral information out there about campaigns. We all get inundated with particular ads or flyers or whatever, and there's a lack of just here's what this initiative really is about, or here's where this candidate is coming from. So we want to be able to fulfill a need that I think is not being met. The other is it's hard in a community to pick, for example, a District 10 supervisor as your choice. Because in a community, everybody has different opinions. I see the Potrero View. It's everybody's paper in Potrero Hill and the environs, Dogpatch, south of Market a little bit, coming up here into towards the Mission even. And if we endorse a candidate or strongly campaign for a candidate, then another part of the community is thinking, well, what's that about? So although we do endorse still, we're tiptoeing much more gently around that, and we try to do more just coverage. That may change, but that's where we are right now.
Gotcha. And how large is the team? So you mentioned that this is a quarter of your month in terms of bandwidth. You're sort of a volunteer yourself, running the show. Who else is on staff, and how do you recruit contributors, pictures, articles? How does that all work out? The nitty-gritty of the paper behind the scenes.
Sure. So we have essentially another quarter-time production person who lays out the paper and kind of manages our advertisers. We have maybe a sort of a less than quarter-time marketing rep who tries to cultivate new advertisers. And then, and obviously we have a delivery service. But other than that, it is essentially a package, a network of freelance writers. And I would say we have a dozen and a half writers that we work with over time. I would say they generally last 2 or 3 years. Some are excellent. I've had journalists have gone on to graduate school of journalism at UC Berkeley, at Stanford University, and they write very well and provide us with pretty good stories. Others are, let's just say, less good. They all get paid. There are a few volunteer writers that pop up now and again, particularly for a feature story. But those writers are assigned a story, 2 or 3 a month, and we compile them together into what looks like the paper. I generally assign all the topics, and I generally identify all the topics. Occasionally somebody might pitch me a story, like you should be doing a story. For example, last month someone thinks we should do a story about the Dogpatch and how it's changing. And he had a particular idea about how to evoke the change going on in Dogpatch, an industrial area that is now increasingly high-tech and residential.
Right.
And so we're going to pursue that story. But most of the time, I just try to keep my eyes and ears open, and I identify a story I think I want done, and then I ask a freelance reporter or volunteer if they'll take it on.
I see. So you tend to distill the tasks.
It won't be pitches. I don't, for some reason, I don't get a lot of pitches, but I do get, and I do get emails, dozens of emails every day from community groups, from public relations folks, from politicians, from companies that are pitching stories, or they're just floating like, here's what we're concerned about. And I'll sift through that and choose from that morass of stuff a few things. Frankly, the most ways I find stories, though, is just walking around the community. You walk around the community and you see a change, like a building's being constructed, or there's something going on in a park, or dogs are being ticketed in a park. Those are all stories potentially. So just being aware of community and what's happening in the community prompts, I think, most of the story ideas.
I see. And then the inquisitive mind comes and back up the observation and creates the story around some novelty that just popped up.
Everything's a story, right? As you know, too. I mean, one of the early stories I did, so if you walk over the 18th Street Bridge over the 101 freeway. That's one of the entranceways into Potrero.
Right.
You're crossing over a landscaped area right below that bridge, which is mostly ivy. So one day I was doing that. I did that many times when I lived on Potrero Hill. And I thought, what is this ivy? Is this an ecosystem? It's not natural. Do the things live there? So we did a story on that. And it's a very unnatural ecosystem, actually, as you would imagine, along a freeway to have sort of what are not indigenous plants. It's an ecosystem to rats and vermin. And then there tends to be other, like, say, homeless encampments above it and such like that. But that's just an example. I mean, every place every place has a story behind it. And if told well, it becomes interesting. And I think people are curious about what's around them. And that's the power of a community newspaper. What's going on in my community? It's just as simple as Sesame Street. Who's down the block and what are they doing?
And how did you get that mindset? How did you enter the paper 10 years ago or so? What is your background, Stephen Moss?
Well, so at that time, I had started a nonprofit that was dedicated to closing what had then been 2 power plants that existed on the southeast side of San Francisco. The Potrero power plant, which you can still see the stack, and is now being redeveloped, and the Hunters Point power plant, which has been dismantled, and which smokestack looked like it was going up right into the public housing there. They both were old and polluting at that time. I started a nonprofit to work with the community, both Potrero Hill and Bay View and Dogpatch, on energy efficiency and energy management so that we didn't need the power plants. We could demonstrate we didn't need them. And in the end, that effort did result in both power plants being closed, or contributed. I wasn't the only one. There was a lot of people involved. And along the way, I got very interested in civic engagement and how people engage in community. And the publisher of the paper at that time, her name was Ruth. She had been publishing it for 40 years. She was in her 80s, and she was pooped. So she needed someone to take it on, and I decided, hey, this could be an interesting thing to do. So I did, and that's how I got it.
And is the Potrero View in its current form, and I want to show it again here, I'm sure you've all seen it in local shops and or in your mailboxes. Do take the time to read it. Is this the form that you envision for the paper, or would you like for it to grow, to become something else, to evolve?
That's a challenging question, I would say. I mean, this is what it looked like in 1970, more or less. It's about the same size of what it looked like. When I acquired the paper from Ruth, this masthead had been designed by an Italian artist, a union activist of the time, and she insisted that this masthead stay the same, essentially part of the agreement, forever. Now, some people look at the masthead and say that's kind of old and I don't know if it evokes things for people or not. And I've over the years had people say, well, you should spiffy up the masthead and change that. I'm not of the mind to, and I'm not really of the mind to change the paper all that much. Although if you look at the layout of this paper, right, it's pretty traditional, story, with a banner and whatever, and we always have something like for Halloween now we have a bat flying, right? So a little extra thing that happens.
Flavor of the month.
Today's if you look at your phone doesn't present like this at all. Right? Your phone presents there'll be a one pop story, or there'll be a kind of a trail of stories, and it'll be much more graphic. This paper, if you saw this if this popped up on your screen of your phone and you were less than say 50, I don't think you'd find this very attractive. So you tell me. I mean, like for me, this gets the job done in a certain way, and it's not crowded or busy.
I definitely need to open it up to get a sense of what is in it. It's not all on the front.
Yes,
but that's okay because I read it through and through anyways. Whether I'm going to look at what Good Life is offering or what happened on 18th Street, I just enjoy reading it when I get a free moment at home, right?
I think you're typical. That's how people approach the paper. It's how someone approaches a book. It's not how someone approaches a website or their phone. So that's the question: is whether that kind of
what's
interest.
happening in my neighborhood.
Yeah.
You know, it doesn't have to be anything immediately relevant to my pursuit.
Yeah. Right. I mean, we have done special issues, for example, and one special issue that was very popular was we printed historical maps. I should have brought that issue. And so the front cover was a map. So if you open it up, and it was a map from 1890. Very colorful, with sketches of boats and such like that. And after we published that paper and it was distributed, everywhere I went, I saw young people looking at the paper in cafes, hunched over it, like, oh, this is so cool, like really examining it. And that we should strive for that kind of engagement, with our covers repeatedly. We can't always do that. That was sort of an expensive issue to do. But I did notice that a certain kind of image, graphics, historical references draw people in a different maybe demographic that we normally get.
And what is your current readership? Do you have sort of numbers like 40,000, 50,000? What's the?
Well, we print. I don't know the exact number these days, but 12 to 15,000. And my guess is at least 2 people read an issue, and it's probably more. So my guess is that on an eyeball basis, 20 to 30,000 people are looking at the paper in some fashion. We also have a website, as you pointed out.
Yeah, is the website getting good traction, or people actually do want the paper copy? As far as you can understand the readership.
Well, we want people to have the paper copy because the paper copy is where we sell ads. So the Good Life Grocery, which is our stalwart advertiser, and they're a great grocer if anybody wants to go there. They're paying for a full page ad. They would not pay the same amount of money for a thing on the internet. Neither would our real estate agents. So we actually don't even post a monthly paper on the web until 2 weeks after the print comes out. We don't want to cannibalize our print paper. We don't really make any money from the internet. This is the fundamental problem with the internet for newspapers. It doesn't generate any income for smaller type outlets.
So you don't have the pay-per-click system?
We can. We'll get pennies or nickels,
right,
or at the best dimes. We're not going to get quarters or even 50-cent pieces because we just don't have the kind of traffic you need for the internet. The internet deals in hundreds of thousands or millions of hits.
Right.
We're talking about thousands or tens of thousands of hits. It's just not good enough.
Gotcha.
And the people, our advertisers understand that, so a real estate ad like this, they're developing a relationship with somebody. So is Good Life. So Good Life is interested because they're just a good community grocery store, and they want to have a relationship with the community. I don't know whether this gets people into their store or not, and I don't know that they care tremendously. They want people to have a good feeling about them, and they want to contribute to a community. A real estate agent makes one sale on an ad, right? One older view reader is ready to move, or younger for that matter, and they like the fact that they've seen something, they've held it in their hand, they've experienced a relationship with this ad in a different way. So that's where our print makes our ad revenues.
Right.
If we didn't have print, we would not survive.
And again, nobody's getting rich off of this. This is pretty much functioning costs that are covered by these ads. It's not like anyone is making a journalistic career out of selling these ads. You guys are all doing it for the love of journalism in the neighborhood.
Well, that's right. I mean, just like you are doing this show for the same reason. I mean, I'm actually shocked how little freelance writers are paid, but I am told that our payment fees are actually on the high side. I don't find them high to myself. You couldn't really make a living off of what we pay our freelancers, but it just is the state of the world right now.
Could always buy you something at the Good Life Grocery.
Exactly, right. A freelancer could afford everything on that ad, exactly.
And since we're showing the paper off, I just want to mention, I've been noticing this advertising salesperson wanted ad for a number of months. So who knows, maybe someone's watching and would like to join the Potrero View. If you're good at selling ads in the neighborhood, there's a job for you right there.
We're welcome. We'd also welcome freelance writers, volunteers, photographers. We have a cartoonist. So anybody who has skills they want to either volunteer and provide or willing to take small fees for, we're always looking.
Good, and we'll wrap up just with your observations about Potrero Hill, South of Market, the Bay View. You've been in the neighborhood for I'm gonna guess at least a decade or probably more.
For a while, yeah.
What are your thoughts on what's happening and the developments and the rising buildings in the SOMA and Bayview? Are you taking it all in stride?
I mean, what are you going to do? I mean, also a Californian. I grew up in California, and California seems to always be in a place of change. The place I grew up doesn't exist anymore. The place I lived when my daughter was 4, Potrero Hill, doesn't quite exist the way it used to. I mean, everything changes. I do think that the city has become less community oriented over the last several years, maybe over the last decade, and more of just a city. But I do think Potrero and Dogpatch retain a lot of their same kind of vibe of this is a community and it is a place we care about and love in a distinct and special way. And that's I really cherish that. I hope that lasts a good long time. The rest of the city there's a lot of growth, as you say, a lot of buildings going on around the edges of Potrero Hill, and we'll see how that then affects, a sense of community in the area.
Great. Well, thank you for doing your part
My pleasure.
to maintaining that community spirit on the hill. Always appreciate the Potrero View. Keep an eye out for it in your neighborhood, and we will see you in a couple more weeks for another episode of Mr. What Presents. See you soon, everyone. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.